Very much. Can you all hear me? Okay, thank you. So I'm very excited to be here tonight. I was sitting at the Shabbat table and we were discussing the different events that Talved has. And I mentioned the event tonight, and my daughter, who's actually a Chayelet, and she's joined us tonight, hello Yael, said, how did you manage that? I follow Rudy all the time. So I'm really excited on a personal note to actually see my daughter on the screen tonight. So I'm just going to tell you all a little bit. So thank you, Rudy. You have a fan of a Chayelet, and I'm very proud to be her mom. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Talved. For those of you who don't know, Talved was established in 1948 for Machalnikim who came to volunteer in the War of Independence and decided that they wanted to stay. And obviously there wasn't a proper infrastructure, and so Talved came into being. Talved is Tel Aviv Federation, but we are actually the South African Zionist Federation, Israel. And we've come a really far way since those years in 1948. Our mission is also to promote, well, our mission's gone, but is to promote the quality of life of Southern Africans and Australians in Israel, and to support their participation in and contribution to Israeli society. We don't live in a bubble. We do realize we all live in Israel, and very excitedly so, the best decision that we've made. And we are very blessed at Talved to have an organization, unlike any other Olim organization, that you can move to the next screen. Talved is made up of lots of different departments within our organization. We'll start off with Klita, and I'm very excited to tell you that tomorrow morning, 22 new Olim will be joining us in Israel from South Africa. So Talved does the Klita of the Southern African Olim and Australian Olim. We've had 417 South African Olim this year and 184 Australian Olim, and we also do the UK regional committees as well. So that is one of our main focuses, is obviously in Klitat Olim, and with the Klitat Olim comes lots of different areas. We are very blessed to have 105 apartments that we rent out at a discounted rate, and with the rental from those apartments, we are then able to help people financially, put food on there with food cards, with counseling. We have a social worker in our office who is available for people who may need financial help or psychological help. So with the money from the rentals of those apartments, we then support that department. We also help about 450 individuals a month put food on the table, and people who are having a hard time, and especially now in Corona, there are a lot more people asking for help. We also support 170 lone soldiers. We try and help them have a home away from home, because it's difficult. It's difficult enough to be a soldier, so much more so if you're a lone soldier, where you've got no mom or dad or home to go home to when you have a free weekend. And we try and give some kind of structure to these kids who have come to volunteer in the army or have made aliyah without their families. We also have 3 amazing scholarship programs. One of them is a financial needs scholarship program. One of them is a program called PRAS, where the student volunteers for 3 hours a week for 94 hours, and in return gets a scholarship towards their studies. This is one of our flagship programs within Talved, because everybody gets to benefit. The student gets their money, and the Olim community gets the support from these students, the Olim community, people with special needs, or the elderly, and that is really one of our very special programs. We also have, well, about 90 events in a normal year. Thank you to Teddy and to Aviva for putting together these amazing online events. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to have physical events, but while we're waiting for those events to happen. So really a very, very special thank you to Teddy and to Aviva for the amazing programs you put together every single month, being so creative with the people that you've got. So really it doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you for that. So we have our numbers in terms of the participants vary, obviously. We also have about 250 volunteers on a regular basis. We have regional committees all over the country. So if you're watching us anywhere from right in the north to down to Eilat and you'd like to get involved, We have regional committees almost all over the country, welcoming new Olim, socializing, and trying to just keep the South African spirit away from home as well. So that's our volunteers. We also have an employment counselor in our office, and we try and hold seminars and pair people with mentors to make Klita easier. We understand that if you have gainful employment, it would make your Aliyah more successful. We also have a magazine, a website, a newsletter. We're on Facebook and Instagram, so please look out for the Telfed for the Telfed website if you're interested in any of our services that we have here. And even if you're not interested in our services and you'd like to donate, we are blessed to have an organization that was counted as Chiuni at this time. We have very high expenses because of the need of the people. So we'd be very happy if you could donate to Telfed as well. I'm a volunteer. I have nothing to gain financially from this. It's an amazing organization, and I call on you to get involved. Looking forward to hearing Rudy. Have a good evening.
Katja, thank you for those words and sharing with us the wonderful thing that Telfed does. In a few moments, we will introduce Rudy and then begin this evening's event. I would remind everybody it's best to have your system on speaker for you for best enjoyment. And again, if anybody has any problems during the event, to please be in touch with Aviva via the chat. So, Rudy, a warm welcome. I hope you hear us. How are you doing today? Rudy joins us from Miami. Actually, Aviva introduced me to Rudy, and she also told me that Rudy has a good following. I also have to admit my ignorance that I wasn't aware of Rudy's activities and the wonderful thing that he does for Israel. So we set up a Zoom meeting with him, and he started to talk. I said, fine, enough, fine, let's just take him, it's all good. And we were really happy and privileged to have you. So thank you for being here, and thank you for giving of your time. Rudy Rochman was born in Paris, France, but moved to Israel at the age 3. His maternal grandparents were Sephardi Jews from North Africa, and his paternal grandparents were Ashkenazi Jews. 2 years later, his family moved to the United States. In 2000, at age 7, Rudy experienced anti-Semitism after being physically removed from a bus in London, England, for being Jewish. He described his experience as the origin for his will to defend Jewish people. Rudy enlisted in the IDF force in the elite paratroopers brigade at the age of 17. Following his service, he attended the University of California, Los Angeles, but later transferred to Columbia University after seeing it was named the most anti-Semitic university in North America. Rudy is a noted speaker and a writer on Jewish rights. He frequently speaks on college campuses to organizations that are pro-Israel. Rudy is also known for his work as a Jewish and Israel rights activist on social media. His thousands of followers and subscribers on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter during his studies at Columbia University. Rudy founded the school's chapter for students supporting Israel and served as the president. In 2018, Rudy received the 30 Under 36 award as a recognition for his influential as a young leader. Rudy currently serves on the board of the Israel Innovation Fund and is a philanthropic fund. In 2020, Rudy ran the World Zionist Congress elections as part of the Vision State. Welcome again, Rudy, and over to you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here. If there's any problems with the audio, please let me know. And a big thank you for Telfed for not only inviting me and creating this event, but for everything that you do for the Jewish people and them coming back to Israel. You know, a lot of people introduced at the beginning, where are we from? We're from Scotland, we're from South Africa, we're from there. But in reality, those are our experiences in the displacement. But where we're all really from, our culture, our identity, our way of life, our language, our ancestors and our descendants is from Israel, which Baruch Hashem, many of us have been able to come back home. I made Aliyah about a year ago. So I'm going to tell all of you a little bit about my personal story, my upbringing, what I've been doing on college campuses and on intellectual spaces, and also share a little bit about the project that I'm involved with today, and to see if anyone else would also like to get involved with our project. So first of all, like the introduction was, I was born in France. My mother's side of the family was born in Morocco and in Algeria. In 1948, there was a massacre of the Jewish community. It was a sort of pogrom in Oujda, and my family fled from Morocco and left to France. My father's side of the family was born in Poland and Belgium, and during the Holocaust, they also fled to France and hid in attics throughout the war in order to survive. So growing up, I realized that, okay, in Morocco and Algeria, we were clearly not Moroccan and not Algerian. We were Jews and we were killed for being Jewish. And in Poland and in Belgium, we were also not Polish and from Belgium. We were Jews and we were killed for not being that. And if my grandparents had been caught in France at the wrong time, they would also have been killed for not being French. And just because I was second generation born in France, that doesn't really define who I am. And so I sort of went through an identity crisis growing up, because age of 3, my family moved to Israel. Then age of 5, we moved to Miami, and I grew up a large part of my childhood in Miami, although we lived also a year in Palo Alto and came back. And just my entire life has been moving from one place to another, like almost as if I was a Bedouin Jew. But basically growing up, I realized that my identity should not be based on where I was born, grew up, lived in, traveled to, resided in, or what passport I had, because all those were different answers. And particularly growing up in Miami, no one really identifies as American. They all identify as Argentinian, Venezuelan, Cuban, Haitian, Jamaican. Even if they're second or third generation born in Miami, they don't really identify as part of the country that they were born in. They identify by where their ancestors came from. So even in a Jewish day school, I was always defined as the French kid. And when I'd visit family in France, I was the American cousin. And growing up in a Jewish day school, I was raised completely Sephardic, because the traditions of my father was not transmitted due to the cut that happened during the Holocaust. So my father adopted my mom's practices, which were Sephardic, and I grew up completely Sephardic. But yet going to Jewish day school, I was often told, oh no, you have to go to that minyan, the Ashkenazi minyan, because your last name is Rochman. And I would find myself going to a place and hearing tunes or being with something that I didn't connect to, just because certain rabbis assumed what my identity should be and were telling me what I should identify with. So that very early on developed an identity crisis within me, where I wanted to find where I was from, what I connected to, who I was, my answer, not the answer that I was expected to give based on who was asking me the question or where that question was being asked. And everything changed for me at the age of 7, where I took a trip to London with my mom and my younger brother. We got onto the red double-decker tour bus that does the tour of London for the tourists. And as we got onto the bus, my mom had a t-shirt that was written in Hebrew that she got from Tzfat. I'm sure most of you know Tzfat is a very artistic, Kabbalistic city. So she had a very artsy shirt that had Emet written on it, truth. And as we got onto the bus driver noticed my mom's shirt, and he asked her, excuse me, is that written in Jewish? And my mom said, no, it's written in Hebrew, but it's the language of the Jewish people, if that's what you're asking. And he said, oh, so you guys are Jews? She's like, yeah, we're Jews. What's the problem? He's like, I don't want any Jews on my bus. You have to get off. My mom said, I don't know who you think you are. We're absolutely not getting off this bus. I'm not giving the example to my 2 young kids to get off the bus when we're told just because we're Jews. And without much hesitation, he got up, grabbed my mom, and threw her off the bus. And in that moment, I froze. I had no idea what to do. I was not prepared for that. Of course, I was 7 years old, but I was not prepared physically, emotionally, intellectually, mentally, ideologically, understanding greater ideas as to what I was actually dealing with. And in the end of the day, there was police that was called. The guy was stopped. He ended up being a neo-Nazi. And that moment changed my life. The first thing is it taught me who I was, because I realized that it didn't matter where I was born, grew up, lived, and traveled to. I was a Jew. And so I started asking myself even deeper questions. What does it even mean to be a Jew? We're constantly told in this day and age that we're a religion. But when we define the word religion in the dictionary that exists, whether in English, in French, in Spanish, whatever it is, it's always the belief system in a God, deity, book, or prophet. So just the belief system for any people. Let me break that down a little bit further. If you look at Christianity, if one does not believe in Jesus, they're not a Christian. If one does not believe in Muhammad or in Islam or in the Quran, they're not a Muslim. If one does not believe in the philosophies or in the teachings of Buddha, they're not a Buddhist. But yet if someone doesn't accept or believe in the Torah and Hashem, they're still a Jew. And in order for someone to become a Christian, they just accept Jesus and they're a Christian. They accept Muhammad and they're a Muslim. They accept the philosophies of Buddha and they're a Buddhist. And when it comes to Judaism, you don't just accept the Torah and Hashem. You have to go through years of a process of adopting an identity, a history, a culture, a value system, a language, aspiration, suffering, a connection to your land, and everything else that comes with being part of the Jewish people. I'm sorry, do you guys hear me right now?
Rudy, it's a bit difficult to hear you with the noise in the background.
So I'm in the only kosher coffee place here in Hollywood, Florida, and they're doing, I guess, a little smoothie for someone. So it should be like a few seconds. I'm really sorry.
No problem.
Okay, it seems like the smoothie has been made. Okay, so I realized already from a young age that the word. Okay, I guess the smoothie. Give me a second. So I'm putting a lot of fruits and vegetables in this smoothie.
Rudy, offer him a coffee and ask him to come back in an hour.
Yeah. Okay, so I realized already from that moment that the way, when we were talking about Judaism as a religion, what we were meaning as Jews is this is our identity, this is our culture, this is our connection to a higher power, this is the way we express ourselves, these are our aspirations, this is who we are. But the word religion is not the same thing for the rest of the world. It means just a belief system for any people. So like I gave the example before on Christianity, you can have an Argentinian Christian, a Nigerian Christian, and a Chinese Christian. And they're three completely different peoples with different histories, different cultures, different aspirations, different nations. They just have the same belief system. And when it comes to Judaism, every Jew, no matter where we were born, we are physical, cultural, and historical descendants of one collective from one land. And it is not based on if we believe in this idea or not. It is based on us being the descendants of this people. And of course, the belief system is a fundamental part of that, but it's not limited to that. So I realized that actually we're not a religion, because being a religion would not give us a right to a land. It would not make us a people. We have religious aspects that are part of our culture, but we're actually not a religion. In fact, if we look at Maori peoples or Native Americans or Aboriginals or Tibetans or Yazidis or Kurds or all sorts of native peoples around the world, they also have religious spiritual practices that are fundamentally connected to who they are, but they don't consider themselves a religion. And I think we started to consider ourselves a religion when Napoleon asked the question to the Jewish community, are you Jews living in France from somewhere else, or are you French people that have this Jewish religion? And in order to get rights and to be accepted into France, of course, I didn't live at that time without rights to know what they had to do in order to give up the, what we really are in order to get those rights. But we answered in the wrong way. We're not this secondary religion. This is who we are. We're part of the nation of Israel, the Jewish people. And Judaism is a sort of portable suitcase that was created when we were displaced from Judea. And within this suitcase, we packed in our history, our culture, our value system, everything about us, and we passed it down lidor vador, generation to generation, with the aspiration of one day Shana B'Yerushalayim coming back home and reviving that culture. So in that moment, it taught me, and I realized that no matter where I would be, I'd always be a Jew. And because I'm a Jew, it's not that I come from the tribe of Judah. In fact, I come from the tribe of Levi from both sides of my family. My mother's side are Kohanim, my father's side are Leviim. So I'm from the tribe of Levi. So why does it even make sense that I'm called a Jew today if I'm not from the tribe of Judah? And you never have the word Jew in the Torah, you never have Judaism in the Torah. It's either the nation of Israel, the Hebrews, or the children of Israel. So why does it make sense that I'm a Jew? It's because the last name of our civilization was called Malchut Yehuda, the kingdom of Judea. And because we came from Judea, we created Judaism, which in ism at the end of a word is a man-made structure. So Zionism, feminism, Judaism, capitalism, communism, whatever ism at the end of the word is a structure. So we created this structure called Judaism in order to preserve who we were, to pass it down and to one day bring that back home to revive it. So I realized, okay, if the only reason I'm called a Jew is because the last name of our civilization was called Judea, if the name of that civilization today is called Israel, which is actually the proper name of my entire nation, including my tribe, and the proper name of the land, that makes me Israeli. I say Am Yisrael Chai, not Yehudi Chai. So from that moment on, I started to identify as I'm Israeli, which to me is the same thing as being a Jew. It's the same thing as being an Israelite. It's why we have a birthright to come back to our homeland. It's why when you have a South African Jew and they move to Australia, their children are Australian Jews and not South African Jew. The Jew remains, but the South African doesn't, because that represents our temporary displacement and where we've had experiences in, which definitely impacts elements of our identity, but it's not what transmits and it's not what we take from what has been passed down. So that moment taught me who I was, but it also made me promise that the next time that I'd see any form of injustice, especially anti-Semitism, I'd have to be prepared. I'd have to be prepared intellectually, ideologically, physically, in every single way. After that moment, from that moment on, whenever someone would ask me, where are you from? I'd say I'm from Israel. And I think actually whenever a Jew is asked that question, we should answer by, we are from Israel, because if Jews themselves don't say that we're from Israel, then how are we to expect the rest of the world to understand that Israel is the home of the Jewish people if we ourselves don't project that to the world when we're asked that question? You know, when we answer, we're from France, we're from Morocco, we're from America, we're from South Africa, we're from Scotland, what we're telling to the world is basically we're from other places. And just because we have this belief system is what made us have a connection to Israel, when it's no, we're from Israel. We were physically displaced from our land and we had to live in other places. And we can talk about that chapter of our lives, but where we're from is where we belong. And where we belong is from Israel, and so that's where we're from. That's my opinion. So after growing up most of my life in the US, I left to Israel at the age of 17 and I joined the army. I was also a lone soldier. I served in the paratroopers as a sniper. And when I finished the army, I decided to start school in the US, which was always my dream to do. I started first at UCLA and Santa Monica College in 2013. And this was at the very beginning of when these movements on college campuses started to normalize anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on campus. And I realized very quickly that there were these groups that claimed to be supporting of Palestinian people and Palestinian rights, but actually were using Palestinian struggles only when it fit their agenda to push a certain narrative. And what do I mean by that? When you look at Palestinians dying by the thousands in Syria, they never talk about them. Palestinians by the hundreds of thousands in refugee camps in Lebanon, they don't mention them. Palestinians without equal rights in Jordan or suffering on the border of Gaza in Egypt, they'll never talk about those Palestinians. They'll only talk about Palestinians only if it has to do with Israel. Now, of course, there's a conflict going on and Palestinians are real human beings and there are Palestinians that are suffering. But when you cherry pick instances of Palestinian suffering and remove all the context out of it and use that suffering in order to pin everything on the other side, that's not actually trying to support Palestinians, that's actually using Palestinians in order to try and attack and hurt the Jewish people. And the way that they're spreading this on college campus is similar to how this was spread in the past, anti-Semitism, which is always about finding the source of suffering and pain of a community and blaming that on the Jewish people. You see that with the Inquisition in Spain, you see that with the pogroms, with the Black Plague, with the Holocaust, with even the death of Jesus being blamed on the Jewish people. Find the source of suffering of that community or a period of time and blame it on the Jews, and that's how anti-Semitism works. Of course, there's also delegitimization of our identity, there's also demonization of who we are, and there's also holding up double standards that also plays a fundamental role within anti-Semitism. But how are they applying this to college campuses today, where they're going to every single minority group? They're going to the Black students, to the Native American students, to the Latinos, to the women, to the LGBT plus group, every single minority group, and they're convincing them that their suffering that they experience in a society is actually either the same thing that Israel is doing to the Palestinians, or in fact, Israel is responsible for their suffering as well. For example, they'll go to the Black Student Association and say, oh, you suffer from police brutality and racism, while we suffer from IDF brutality and Israeli racism. And actually, the New York State Police Department is being trained by the IDF to kill Black people. Now, how do they even make this argument? Because anti-Semitism was never spread by telling the truth. It's because there was this one time, this ex-IDF soldier that served in the IDF 30 years ago, like every single Israeli, and he became a Krav Maga instructor, and he gave one precinct in New York City a class on counterterrorism and Krav Maga. So because this one guy who has nothing to do with the state of Israel or with the IDF, who served in the IDF like every other Israeli, who 30 years hadn't even been in the IDF, gave a class on self-defense, that's how they make the link to say that the IDF forces police people in America to kill Black people. And the truth is that anti-Semitism was never spread by telling the truth. It was always by manipulating things, manipulating the fears and pains of others to get people to the conclusion that the Jews are the problem and that's what we need to fight in order to make a better world. And that's what they've been doing on college campuses, going to all the minority groups. And why is a college campus so important is because it's the future political and intellectual class of the next generation. Those coming out of campuses are going to be the lawyers, the doctors, the people in the media, the people in the government, the people in business. And if this is what the next generation is being taught, that Israel's the worst thing in the world, has no right to exist, is doing horrible things, is even causing the problems that exist everywhere else in the world, then what are we going to expect the world to be in the future? So when I realized that this is what was happening on the anti-Israel side, I started to look within. Okay, well, that's what we're dealing with. What is our side doing about it? What is the Jewish community? What is the Zionist community? What are we doing about it? And as soon as I started to speak to organizations and to see what kind of events were happening, it was basically, let's do a Israel event within our Hillel or within our Chabad house or within our API house. We'll put on some Omer Adam or Shlomo Altzi music. We'll bring some hummus. We'll do a little Israel like fun night and between the already Jewish Zionist community. and we'll pat ourselves on the back and feel better. But yet everyone on campus is being taught as a next generation to hate our people, to not understand who we are, and we feel better because we did a little Omer Adam Israeli hummus night party within our own little shtetl of our community. And then we ask ourselves, why is this becoming worse? If I had to give an analogy to describe the situation, is as if you have two sports teams. You have Team Israel and Team Anti-Israel. Team Anti-Israel is practicing, recruiting the best players, recruiting the best coaches, the best facilities, the best stadium. They want to be the best team and to win the championship. And Team Israel is on the sideline bench talking about how their jerseys are made with Israeli technology while whispering to each other. And then we ask ourselves, why is it getting worse? It's because we're not even playing. We're not even doing anything about it. So I started speaking to these community leaders and organizations and student groups. I was like, okay, we have to go out there. We have to expose the lies. We have to narrate our story. We have to share the truth. We have to be able to change people's minds. And the response that I got from the community leaders or from the organizations was always, no, Rudy, don't rock the boat. If you do something, it'll just get worse. And I realized that this was exactly what the Jews said as the Holocaust didn't happen overnight, as anti-Semitism rose leading to the Holocaust. In fact, when I went on March of the Living, which is a trip that I think every Jew should do before joining the army, the thing that shocked me the most is not that 6 million Jews and other millions of people were killed, because half my family was exterminated during the Shoah. The thing that shocked me the most is reading the letters of Jewish community leaders and rabbis and presidents of communities and what they were telling each other as anti-Semitism was rising during that time. And what they were telling to each other was basically, don't worry about it, it'll just go away. If you do something, it'll just get worse. And that was exactly what I was starting to hear from the community as anti-Semitism was rising on college campuses. Don't do anything. If you do something, it'll just get worse. Just put your head down, just ignore it. It'll just go away. If you do something, you're just bringing attention to it. And I realized that we're again repeating history. Anti-Semitism is now rising, not because they're doing a good job. It's because we're doing a bad job. What's the point of saying never again, if not to take responsibility on our future? Because if it happens again, it's us that failed, because it was our responsibility to prevent it from happening in the first place. So we need to take a bit more responsibility to make sure that anti-Semitism is brought down, and not just as it rises up, go and try to make deals with whatever host country we live in or the host power, because eventually the host power country will be representative of what the majority of the population is. And if pop culture is shifted to making people believe that the Jews are the problem, then it doesn't matter what deals that you have with the government. Eventually governments change and eventually laws can be overturned. So after realizing that for a year at UCLA, I decided to take a year off, like a good Israeli after the army, and backpack throughout Asia. And during my time there, I already knew that I wanted to transfer to another university. And I was so fed up with all of my peers and even the parents of my friends saying, oh, no, I'm not going to send my son or my daughter to this school, it's too anti-Semitic. Oh, I'm not going to go there, it's too anti-Israel. So I went on Google and I typed in #1 most anti-Semitic school in the US. Columbia University came up, and I knew, okay, that's where I'm going to transfer to. I don't want to hear any more excuses of people saying, we can't go there, it's too hard there, it's too far gone. I'm going to go to the hardest place, I'm going to change it, and no one could ever make an excuse again. So I transferred to Columbia. I founded the grassroots student movement there that wasn't right-wing, left-wing, one state, two states. I have my own personal opinions, but it's not our objective to push a political agenda onto a democratic country. It's our objective on campuses to do three things: to empower, to educate, and to expose. And I'm going to break those down. The first part is the most important part: to empower, meaning we need to be able to give the tools to the next generation of Jewish leaders and allies. When it came to Black rights, it wasn't only Black people fighting for Black rights. When it came to women rights, it wasn't only women fighting for women rights. So when it comes to Jewish rights, we should make a space for other allies to be involved with our movement and not only stay in our own shtetl and make it the only Jewish thing, okay? We need to be able to give the tools needed to be not only Jews in theory, but Jews in practice. Meaning going to a Jewish day school almost my entire life, most of the peers that I had with me, 12 years of Jewish education, they don't even speak Hebrew. They have no idea about how to talk about their identity. They have no idea how to recognize or deal with anti-Semitism. They don't know how to talk about Israel to the right and to the left, or how to debate, how to understand counter narratives, how to even be able to create coalitions with other movements. Those are the tools that are necessary to be Jews in practice today. And those are the tools that our communities have failed to give to the next generation. So our first and primary goal of our movement was to give that empowerment. So we would do training sessions every other day, how to talk about Israel to the right, how to talk about Israel to the left, how to learn how to debate, how to understand the counter narratives that exist against us, so that when you're faced with those narratives, you actually know what they're talking about, you know their sources, you know what books that they're referencing, in order to be able to deconstruct that and show the truth. The second part, which is also very important, is to educate. It is our responsibility to tell the story of the Jewish people in Israel. You wouldn't want to hear about Black rights from KKK members. You wouldn't want to hear about women rights from people who are anti-women. So why are we listening to people talking about Israel and Jewish rights from people who are anti the Jewish people and anti-Israel? We need to be the ones that narrate the conversation and tell the story of the Jewish people. However, we need to also understand our audience. I'm fluent in French, English, and Hebrew. If I'm selling a product in France, I have to sell that product speaking French because the audience is French speaking. If I go to America and I sell the same product, I need to now shift the language to English. And we need to understand the audience of the younger generation. It is not the same as the older generation, which talks in accomplishments. Oh, Israel created the cherry tomatoes and ways and drip irrigation. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. It's a great country that has survived the miraculous, all these words. That to the younger generation does not matter. Because the fundamental question to the younger generation today is, why does Israel have a right to exist and who are the Jewish people? And Israel does not have a right to exist because we created a small tomato for a salad. Israel does not have a right to exist because we created some water system to irrigate the Negev. Israel does not have a right to exist because we created the USB stick, or because when you take an Uber, you see Waze being used and we feel proud because Waze was created by Israel. That is not why Israel has a right to exist. That is cool. We can talk about that. That's a separate conversation. But again, the fundamental question is, why do we have a right to exist? Even the fact that we're a democracy, I don't expect anything less from my people than to have a democracy. If anything, I'd expect us to create an even better system that is truly democratic, unlike the systems that exist today, which are full with problems, and all the choices that we have are bad choices. So again, we have to stop using these things, because if you look at Thailand and Singapore, semi-dictatorship, Thailand monarchy, Jordan monarchy, Morocco monarchy, no one's questioning their legitimacy to exist. So why are we giving superficial answers to a question that's actually deep? Why does Israel have a right to exist, and who are the Jewish people? And the way to answer that question, to be able to speak in a language that communicates with our generation, is that the story of Israel is a story of a 4,000-year-old native people that came from the land of Judea, that were physically and forcibly displaced by a Western white imperial nation called the Romans. Even during our displacement, we maintained a constant presence in their homeland, where there was never a time in history without Jews living in this land. And after 2,000 years of extermination, persecution, and oppression, we created the most successful indigenous liberation movement that ever existed, where for the first time in history, a native people actually came back home, revived their civilization, decolonized their land, kicked off the oppressive British, revived their language, and were able to recreate Israel. And when you talk about Israel in that story, people understand, especially the younger generations, like, oh, I get it. You're like the story of the Tibetans that go back to Tibet. You're like the story of the Native Americans and the Aboriginals and the Maoris, all these other peoples that I support because I support morality. I need to support you too, because you represent the success of all those stories. Rather than just saying, well, we needed a safe place to go after the Shoah and we won all the wars and we created nice things, that doesn't actually answer the question. And people don't understand who the Jewish people are. They think that we're just this persecuted religion, but we're actually a physical nation and a people from Israel. And if they understood that we were from there, they'd understand why we have a right to go back there, why we have a right to revive it from the British and take it back and liberate our land. Now, the third element is a more offensive element. It's to expose. We already have empower, we have educate. The third is to expose. There will always be movements against a minority, against people of color, against women, against Jews. There will always be individuals that are xenophobic. However, it's the responsibility of that community, whether Black people, women, or Jews, to be able to rise up and to shift pop culture to getting people to recognize what is right and what is wrong and how to stand against it. If we go 70, 80 years ago in America, we didn't have civil rights. We didn't have women's rights. But today we do. And if you go to a college campus and say like Columbia University that I graduated from, and 7 years ago someone were to say something sexist or racist, that would be pop culture, that would be normal, that would be acceptable. Today, if someone says something like that, right away they're kicked out of school, or there's an email being sent by the advisor, we're so sorry, we believe in freedom of speech, but this is hate speech, and rightfully so. We should be able to react to problematic language and to horrible ideas. Right? There's freedom of speech and there should be freedom of reaction to bad speech. So when it comes to someone saying something anti-Semitic today, No one says anything. No one does anything. The society does not recognize that as a problem. And it's because most Jews don't know how to recognize anti-Semitism and certainly do not know how to deal with anti-Semitism. And if we ourselves do not recognize or deal with it, then how are we to expect others to be able to do so? So we need to be the ones that take the power into our hands. So I'm going to give an example of something that we did at Columbia University that represents this exposing nature. Now, there's this term that's very hot today on college campuses and in intellectual spaces called pinkwashing. And it's this idea, again, that the only reason Israel does not kill people that are gay, lesbian, trans, and so on, like they do in other places in the Middle East, is because they do that in order to wash away the crimes that they commit against Palestinians. Israel wants you to focus on the fact that they're not killing gay people and lesbians in order to wash away the crimes that they do against Palestinians, which is an absurd idea. So in this event that they were about to present, we did 3 things in order to deconstruct the event. The first thing that we did is we printed flyers with all the counter information exposing what that actually was about. And we came 30 minutes earlier to the event and we waited outside. And as every student walked into the event, we passed them out a flyer and said, hey, thank you to our event. Please read a little bit about it before you come in. Hey, thank you for coming to our event. Please read a little bit about it. So every student that was coming to participate in this event actually received one of our flyers, read the information against the event before even hearing it. And even during the event, they were like, excuse me, here it says this, here it says something different than what you're saying. We actually used their own audience against them. The second thing that we did is we created these big flyers, these big posters that said lies, false, inaccurate, and anti-Semitism. And every single time the speaker said something that was false, inaccurate, a lie, or anti-Semitic, we stood all the way in the back of the room and we lifted up the signs. Now, why is it like the border gray area of disrupting an event but still legal? Because we're not preventing anyone from speaking. We're standing all the way in the back of the room, so no one is behind us that's lifting up the signs prevents someone from seeing. However, it's very clear that when we lift up the signs, people hear that there's something going on in the background and they turn around. And what does that do? They connect lies, false, and inaccurate to what is being said. And even if they don't believe us, at least that they know that this is not something that is just widely accepted, and they should be careful before saying that because someone else is claiming that to be a lie, false, anti-Semitic, and not true. And at the last thing that we did 3 things. That was the second one. Was we planted 2 students in the room, myself included in the audience, and we rose our hand at the end of the question. We said, excuse me, Mahmoud Ishrawi was a Palestinian militant member of Hamas. In 2005, they found out that he was gay and they shot him 3 bullets to the chest. Will you condemn it? Well, it's not our role to talk about Hamas. We're here to talk about the Israeli state. And I said, let me repeat it. Mahmoud Ishrawi was a Palestinian militant member of Hamas. In an event where you're talking about the intersectionality between LGBTQ plus rights and Palestinian rights, are you not willing to condemn the murder of a Palestinian for being LGBTQ plus? No, we're not here to talk about it. So how dare you talk about pinkwashing? You're the one doing the pinkwashing. You're the one now not only using the suffering of Palestinians out of context and whenever it fits your agenda, you're now using the suffering of other minorities in order to fulfill an agenda of being anti the Jewish people. Nothing to say. I filmed everything on camera. We sent it to the gay group on campus that they were being co-sponsored with the event, and the next day they broke their coalition. And the point of this story is to show one of many things that we need to be the ones that shift culture. We need to be the ones that exposes bad ideas and shows campus the truth. We can't just stand there and expect the world to know. We have to actually go out and change the world that we see. So those are some examples of the things that we did on college campus. Eventually, this movement became something very international and these ideas started to spread. I started to go more into focusing on the macro change rather than just Columbia and campuses by creating videos to inspire the next generation to be able to deal with certain situations, how to speak up, how to have the courage, how to not lose your cool, how to be able to answer to certain problematic things that are being said. All things that, to be honest, I shouldn't have had to learn later in my life, and I shouldn't have to teach. This should have been taught like Hebrew or our identity or Judaism in any way is taught at a young age. And this is something that has to change within Jewish education in the world. Extremely important. After my time on campus, again, I started going more into videos. I spent a year after Columbia in South America, where I did a research project on the Jewish communities to create an economic and social incentive program to allow young Jews around the world to be able to make Aliyah, not only to move for ideological reasons like Israel's our home and this is where we need to be, but also to be able to build jobs and to give social attributes and incentives for people to actually come there. That's still in the works. And a year ago, I made Aliyah. I just finished my master's in business at IDC. And during that time, I've been very involved with a movement called Habayit. It's a movement in Israel that brings Israelis and Palestinians together, local activists, for us to be able to understand each other's narratives and to be able to build a future that actually focuses on the needs of both peoples. So in my opinion, when someone talks about the future solution or whatever it may be, and they don't talk about Judea and Samaria being a part of our homeland, that is someone focusing on trying to find a solution to end the injustices, but not fulfilling the needs and aspirations of the peoples. And in order to find a solution, we have to focus on ending the injustices for both populations, which are different, and fulfilling the aspirations of both populations, which do not contradict. A big problem within this conflict is that what we think is important for us as Jews, we tend to superimpose onto Palestinians and expect that for them, when they talk about Palestinian liberation and a future, they mean the same thing that we do, or for them that we mean the same thing as they do. It's not the same. In fact, being Palestinian and being Israeli is also not the same. It could be equal because all identities are equal, but it's just not the same. And we have to understand the nuances that exist and build human relations between the real people, the real activists, the real future leaders of both peoples, and figure out the way to build the future together. And there are many theories and hypothetical solutions that can exist, and we're building those relations on the ground, but we're doing it from a perspective of not giving up on what's important to the Jewish people, but to advance Jewish liberation. Because we talk a lot about tikkun olam and ola goim, to be a light upon other nations and to fix the world. Well, how about we first fix the situation in our own home with our own cousins before we focus on the rest of the world? So that's a big part of what I do. And the next project that I'm focused on, which I'm very happy to announce, we just announced it a few days ago, it's a documentary that we're going to Africa in order to share the stories of communities that most of the world does not know about. There are Jews in Uganda, in Nigeria, in Zimbabwe, in Madagascar, in Tanzania, really all over Africa. Many of them have been able to do even genetic tests, such as the Lemba in Zimbabwe, and they found the Cohen gene. So it's not even a question that they descend from Am Yisrael. There are other communities, such as the Ugandan community, that converted around 1907. So they converted to Judaism, but they converted way before the creation of Israel, and they suffered to stay Jewish. They were being persecuted and exterminated, and they still suffered to be Jewish. So it's not just they converted because they had a feeling in the moment. It's something much deeper. And we're going to go and create a documentary to share their stories. Now, the goal of this documentary is to get it to a large platform like Netflix. And we believe through telling these stories, we can be able to re-educate the world on who the Jewish people are. Because through these stories that are going to be very interesting for the world, wow, like Black Jews in Africa, lost tribes, what does this mean? I've always heard about this. It hits the diversity, it hits the popular Black Lives Matter thing. It really hits all the things that are hot right now in pop culture. But through this film, we can actually be able to tell the story of who the Jewish people are, that we're a physical nation from the land of Israel, that we were displaced all around the world. And this is the unique experience of those that were displaced in this region of the world. But there were Jews that were displaced in other regions of the world that you may have thought were a religion at first, but actually are people just like all of us. And also to reconnect these communities back to Am Yisrael. It started actually when I was a student at Columbia, and I met a woman that came back from Uganda that was on her honeymoon trip with her husband. And she brought a kippah back to the Chabad rabbi, and I just so happened to be there. And I asked her, I've never seen a kippah like that. Where did you get it from? And she said, oh, I got it from the community in Uganda of Jews. And I started seeing pictures on her phone of this, in the middle of nowhere, this little shack with the Magen David, and it's a Beit Knesset, and there's these Jews with talitot and tefillin, and it's like, how do I not know that they exist? How do I not know that there are Lemba of people in Zimbabwe, which Lemba in the local language means a population that is on the move with heavy luggage, which makes sense because that's what Jews were doing. They were constantly being forced out and moving, whether it's for opportunities to be able to make money because we didn't have equal rights in any land that we were lived in, or being extremely persecuted. So we're trying to be able to tell those stories and to reconnect these communities back to Am Yisrael for us to really uncover what it means to be a Jew. What does it mean to convert? What does it mean to be a descendant of the nation of Israel? What does it mean to have a genetic connection? What does it mean to have a historical connection? What does it mean to have to suffer to keep your identity and what we go through? In fact, I saw a documentary on the Igbos in Nigeria, which the Igbos believe to be Hebrew, another word for Hebrews. And the way that this historian is describing the Igbos, they're saying there are three communities in Nigeria. There are the Muslims in the north, there are the Christians, and then there are the Igbos, which have mostly been converted to Christianity due to British colonialism, but a small portion of them have kept their Igbo, Hebrew, Jewish, Israelite identity. And he describes these Igbos as the people that always tend to succeed in the society, the richest class of a population within all of Africa, the people that within Nigeria are always blamed for all the problems that exist, the people that end up rising to positions of power in every sector, even when they're pushed down and that their currency is brought down and taken away, the people that always help one another, the people that are always the most educated and influential within a society. And, you know, as a Jew, when we start to hear another person describing this population this way, we start to realize this is the same thing that we've experienced everywhere else in the world. And what if they came home first? What if they got to Israel first and we were still suffering in Europe, or we were still suffering in North Africa, or we were still suffering in other places that we were living in? Wouldn't we expect them to help us? So I think it's for me, when I found out that these communities existed, it was almost as if I found out at the age of 24 that I had a brother or sister my whole life that I never knew about, and I was robbed of this relationship. And my goal with this project, and right now we need help from community members, we need to fundraise in order to be able to make this project happen, is to be able to tell these stories and show the stories to the world, but also through those stories, be able to educate the world on who the Jewish people are, that we're not just this color, we're not just this religion, we're way more than that. We're a physical nation and civilization, and our nation and civilization was revived through Zionism to come back home and to be able to achieve a purpose that we have in this world. So that's a bit of my presentation. I'm going to link the website onto the chat for any of you that would like to watch a video about what we're doing. And we're also a 501c3 nonprofit. So if any of you know anyone that would like to donate, we really need help from community members, but that would also be tax deductible. And we do need to fundraise $600,000 to be able to make this project happen, because it's a full-on documentary that's high production value. We're going to be a month and a half in Africa with a whole crew, so it takes a lot of resources to be able to make this happen. And there's a link there of how to donate, and if anyone would like to reach out to me, I'll also leave the email for this project that people can reach out to. And yeah, I appreciate your time, and I'd love to take some questions, whether on what's happening with activism or on this project as well.
Thank you, Rudy. I'm sure that you have lots of questions coming up. And empower, educate, and expose sounds good. And also, we wish you good luck with your new project in Africa. Would anybody like to ask a personal question? Aviva, is there anything in the chat that you'd like to?
There's nothing here in the chat, but I know I have a question.
Certainly.
Rudy, I know it's a big question, but what, in your opinion, is the solution for peace among Israelis and Palestinians?
So it's the billion-dollar question. So first of all, I think that we have to stop thinking in terms of peace, because what does peace really define? It defines a point in time where two or more parties don't have an incentive to fight each other. But if you want long-term peace, it's not about just an incentive not to fight each other, it's to create a system of justice. If you have justice across the board, then there's no reason for conflict, there's no reason for fighting, and you have peace. So justice is the foundation, and peace is what you get once you create justice. Now, in order to create a just solution, I'm going to give an analogy to describe how we should even be looking at this situation, because I don't think we should be imposing a solution. I think a solution is something that has to be developed and achieved. So if I'm an artist, before I pick the frame of the painting of my masterpiece, I need to first pick the canvas, the texture, the color, the size, the shape. Then I need to pick my paintbrushes and the colors I'm going to use. Then I need to come up with an idea of what I want to paint and start and mess up and fix. And when I finish the masterpiece, then I take a step back and I say, you know what? On this piece, I want a thick wooden frame. Or on this masterpiece, I want a thin metallic frame. But you pick the frame after you make the piece. So I can go into a frame store and theorize about, yeah, maybe one day I would like to use a frame like this. But the first thing that you need to do is actually bring the artists together, which are the Israelis and Palestinians, have us understand what do we need to build on, where are we going to build, what do we need to build, start to paint that image, and then once we finish, then that's what the final frame is going to look like. So I can give an example of a hypothetical solution that can work, that has come out of these conversations, but any offer of a solution is all hypothetical. Until the peoples come together and focus on ending the injustices that are experienced by both, and fulfilling the aspirations that are needed by both in a way that works for both, we're never going to get there. So a hypothetical solution that was brought up is the federation plan. Well, let's say you have Judea and Samaria, West Bank, divided into Area A, B, and C. As most of you know, Area A completely controlled by the Palestinians, Area B mutual control, Area C almost completely controlled and inhabited by the Israeli government. So let's say we already make Area C a part of Israel, and we take Area A and B and we change this into 8 federations. I'm just giving 8 as an example. And each of these federations votes locally for a local leader. And those local leaders, they'll have 8 or you'll have 2 for each, so you'll have 16, and they form a secondary governmental body. So you have the Knesset and you have this other governmental body. And one body has more national power and the other body has more local power. Because if we understand what are the needs that Palestinians have, they care less about national control. They care more about who the family is running the Shechem, or which is called Nablus today, or who's running Hebron, or who's running Kfar Husan. They care more of who's running the local level than the national level. And for Israelis, most Israelis have no idea who the mayor is. Or if they know who that mayor is, he or she, they don't know what that person is doing. We care more of the national control. So this system is focused on actually giving more local, domestic control for the regions that are going to be in the federation, and more national control for the regions that are already under Israel. And you would not have a wall, you'd be able to live in whatever place. And if I, let's say as an Israeli, were to move to Shechem and to Nablus, then I would vote on the local level and no longer on the national level. And if a Palestinian were to move to Tel Aviv, then they would vote for the national level and no longer for the local level. And there's even conversations of saying that you can't vote unless you do it as national service or civil service. It doesn't necessarily have to be the army. It could be volunteering with Magen David Adom, doing Shirut Leumi, helping elderly, cleaning, pollution, recycling, or doing something in order to be able to vote across the board for everyone. There are many conversations out there of how to create something. And I think if we all put our brains together to focus on building something that works for us all, then we'd actually be able to get there. But instead, we're always talking about one state or two states, black and white narrative, polarized, either this or that, and none of that. It's not going to be one state, it's not going to be a two state. It's going to be a one civilization in a way that works for us all, in a way that fulfills the Jewish aspirations and needs, and a way that fulfills the needs of the Palestinians, which again are different and do not contradict actually our needs. The only people that say that they contradict our needs are the ones that say we want Israel to be destroyed. And the only reason that say that they want Israel to be destroyed is because they were taught that the reason that they're suffering is because Israel exists. And if you actually end their suffering and give them what they truly need, then there's no more reason for them to be anti-Israel. And all those that are anti-Israel, the population would reject them themselves. That's my opinion, and those are the conversations that we've had with local Israeli and Palestinian people. But I don't think we need to look at this as what is the solution we're going to impose? This is what's written. This is what we're going to impose on the people. More bringing the peoples together and building something as a process and eventually getting there.
Thank you.
Rudy.
I've got something to say, but not a question.
Go ahead, Jael.
I don't know how I got to see your videos, but last week I think I saw most of them. I've lived in Israel all my life. I was born here, so I never really experienced like someone coming to me and saying free Palestine or something like that. So in your videos, it's amazing to see you go overseas and like experience anti-Semitism. I don't really feel it here, like the people and stuff, but I don't feel, no one comes up to the street, or I don't go to university or something and they tell me free Palestine. I just think it's amazing to see the amount of information you have and the love you have for Israel. Obviously, like you weren't born here, and like I agree with what you say that you belong here. But it's amazing to see. Like I wish if I was in your spot, I don't think I would have the information to tell people the things about Israel like you do. Like I feel like I take it for granted being here. But I just think it's amazing, and keep on doing what you're doing. And I hope you reach your goals. And yeah, I'm a fan.
I appreciate it. And I think that we all need to realize that no one is born with information. So I don't have this talent that I was born with that I know information. It's just I sought out to find the truth, to find the history, and to learn the entire perspective, and not only the narrative that we have, but also the counter narratives that exist. So when I'm debating someone that's anti-Israel, I know their narrative better than they do. I know exactly why they're saying something, what they're bringing up, what they're sourcing, what book they're referencing. And because I was able to learn their narrative better than them, it's very easy to be able to interact with someone and to express yourself. So I think that everyone that's watching or wants to learn, I also had to learn, and I still have to learn. We all still have to learn. And I think that a lot of people, they get into a situation, they feel so much frustration that they don't know. Well, the solution to that is not just turn your head around and say, well, I don't know, so I can't do it. It's go and learn, go and empower, go and educate yourself, and be able to deal with those situations. Because if we don't deal with those situations, we know where the world is going to go. And I am not the answer. I'm just not part of the problem.
I've learned a lot, so I think you are obviously in the right path. But yeah, I learned a lot.
Okay.
So I would just like to say that I listened to what you were saying, and you were saying that you got involved at the beginning of the problems in universities in the US. I don't know about that, but I came on Aliyah in 1983. In 1982, I had a discussion in Scotland at Strathclyde University with a number of students who heard that I was coming on Aliyah. One of the students happened to be the Palestinian boyfriend of a friend of mine. And I turned around, and when he heard that I was coming to Israel, and he said, just wait, you will wait, and you will see in 30 years what we are going to do, and you won't have a country to go to. Never told my friend about this because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. But that was my first encounter with university anti-Semitism. And I started to fight back then. And I felt, as you said, that Jewish people wanted to bury their heads. My parents said to me, you can't do anything, you have to keep quiet. And I can't keep quiet. And I started to fight back against the anti-Semitism, but I found that nobody wanted to listen to me. And I feel that all these years later, this is what's happened because we haven't taken action. And I think it's so important that in order to avoid another disaster for Jewish people, we really have to make people aware. We really have to get people involved, and we really have to fight back.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Again, the reason that we're even in this situation is our fault, because we were the ones that were supposed to not allow it to get there. We're the ones that are supposed to shift the way that culture in the world sees and understands who the Jewish people are and why anti-Semitism is bad, how it has to be recognized, how it has to be fought against. And we have not prepared the next generation to be able to do that. You go to a college campus today, no matter where you are, almost every single Black student is prepared and conditioned to deal with racism. They know how to recognize it, they know how to respond to it, and everyone else in that, let's say, institution will stand up against racism, and justly so, and side with those people of color that are being, experiencing xenophobia. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, most Jews have no idea how to recognize it, have no idea how to deal with it. And most of the society doesn't know how to deal with it either because we haven't been taught ourselves. So we need to be taking more responsibility. And the way that I'm doing that, I know that there's a lot of bad that comes from social media. There are echo chambers where we tend to hear the same opinions. There's confirmation bias where you type in something and whatever answer you want to find, you're going to find, even if it's not the truth. But there's also an ability to interact and to share information. And I think that the millennial and Gen Z generation that grew up with social media, or as social media came into our lives already as children, we are way more interconnected. And even with these new apps, maybe some of you haven't heard, there are like new social media apps that even younger generation are using, like TikTok. It's based on the location that you're living in. So many Israelis, when they're on TikTok apps, they see creation and art and expression of Palestinians, and many Palestinians see creation and art and expression of Israelis. And all of a sudden, these ideas that we were taught that this is supposed to be my enemy, all of a sudden it's a human being, and they're just as human as me, and they have families too, and they have aspirations, and they want to have a good job, and they want to have a good education, and they have, a boyfriend, and they have a girlfriend, and they eat, and they drink, and they go to sleep, and they're the same. So I think we need to be able to use social media in a way that creates a more holistic view. And I try in the content that I create to speak in a way that when an Israeli or a Palestinian hears me speak, I don't say anything against them. To the contrary, I say things that make both of them feel like this is something that I can support. So I don't know that particular Palestinian that you met, but I think that if we were able to go back in time or today find that person again and speak to them and have them understand that Israel does not have to be against what he wants for his people, and we can find a way to make it work together, I don't think he would still be against Israel. I think a lot of these people take positions against Israel because they've been brainwashed to think that it's one or the other. In order to be pro-Palestinian, you have to be anti-Israel. In fact, if you're anti-Israel or anti-Palestinian, you're anti-both. because there's no reality where either population disappears. So at some point, we need to be able to realize we're all human beings. We're all living in this generation. We all have the ability to change the world around us. So let's actually focus on doing that in order for us to achieve the goals that we all want. And our liberations movements actually unlock one another. So I think that you're extremely right to say that most people are doing nothing, and it's still the situation today. And I think it's because a lot of trauma. When we look at in psychology, how can one react to a traumatic experience? Let's say a woman is in an abusive relationship and their husband is beating the woman, right? There are 3 ways in which a woman can react. She can fight back and remove herself from the situation, which is what I think we're all doing. All of us, we're the people that we see anti-Semitism. No, we're not just going to stand for it. We're going to fight back. We're going to remove the situation. Or she can make excuses. Oh, it was just one time. He didn't really mean it. He was just drunk, which is what I think most Jews do. It doesn't really matter. It's just over there. Just let them speak over there. Or she can even blame herself. Oh, no, it's my fault. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done that. And then you have Jews from the Toy Culture to the far left on many different platforms that side with their enemy, that side with people that are anti-Jewish self-determination, anti-Jewish rights, and we see them growing. And it's because their reaction to a traumatic experience and the fear that they have to an other that is attacking them, their conclusion is we need to actually side with them against our own in order to survive. And that's not, I don't call that self-hating Jews. The same way I wouldn't call that a woman that's blaming herself a self-hating woman. I would call that a woman that's been broken from the trauma she experienced, and that we need to go and help that woman in order to overcome that. And we need to go and help those Jewish brothers and sisters of ours in order to overcome that as well. We need to understand how trauma is experienced and how to deal with it. And in our education, and we haven't been taught how to deal with trauma. We haven't been taught how to deal with anti-Semitism, let alone even recognize it, let alone even conceptualize it in our minds. So the reason we're in this situation is because we really failed in terms of educating the next generation. And that's what I hope that the content that I create does. And I'm not the only person. There are many people that do amazing work when it comes to this subject. And we have to stop making it about this organization or this individual or this acronym. It's all of us. We are one nation, one people, and we all have to be able to use our talents and skills and life and passion and actions in order to make the world a better place.
Thank you, Rudy. Aviva, I see there still are a few more questions on the chat if you'd like to read.
Yes, Rudy, Sarah asks, are there other people out there on the campuses who have taken over from you and are doing what you did?
Yeah, so each campus is different and each campuses change also with time, because if you look at a campus, you have freshmen, sophomore, junior, and senior. When the seniors graduate, freshmen come in, and within 4 years, you have a brand new campus. So not every single year it's the same level in each campus. Sometimes one year you have an amazing group, then other years you don't have that much of an amazing group. But I see more and more of the younger generation beginning to rise up, to stand up, to speak out, and to start changing things. So I do see a shift in people becoming active. It's not yet anywhere near enough of what it has to be, and we have to keep pushing, we have to keep educating, we have to keep empowering. But it is starting, and it has changed a lot in the past years. So.
Great. And Vivian asks, how do you think normalization of Israel's relations with UAE, Bahrain, etc., will affect these campus conversations, if at all?
Sure, I think it changes the relationship of a lot of the Arab world when it comes to the perception of the Jewish people in Israel. And it's accepting the fact that Israel exists and the Jewish people are from the Middle East and that we have a right to be integrated as a part of the Middle East. I don't think we should be in the Eurovision. We're not in Europe. We should be competing in song contests in the Middle East. We should be competing in basketball and soccer and other sports in the Middle East. And we need to be integrated part of the Middle East and also take responsibility for things that are happening there. There are huge human rights violations happening, and we shouldn't just stand in Israel and do nothing. We have to be able to really help our brothers and sisters and cousins in other regions of the world. So I do think that the fact that Israel has now normalized relations with other Arab countries, which will only be more with time, does change the perception of a lot of either students that are, sort of third party, or actually Arab students that come from these countries and now grow up in a society that are very open to the idea of Israel, Israelis, the Jewish people, and are no longer feel the need to be pressured into taking a position that's anti-Israel in order to fill in some sort of societal norms that you have to be against the Jewish people in Israel. So I think that these are amazing changes that are happening, and I just hope to see them continue.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question for Rudy? Feel free to unmute yourself. Yes, Eve.
Hi, I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan. I've been following you for a while and I think you're amazing. Love your work. I just wanted to talk about your video that you made about Seth Rogen. That I don't know if everyone's aware of that or have watched it, but I suggest you all do. He did a podcast with another Jewish guy, and it was very anti-Israel and very self-hating. And then Rudy, you just dissected it and spoke your truth. And I just wondered if Seth ever saw that video or ever responded to you.
So I don't know if he saw it, I can't confirm. I know that a lot of people posted different things, and that there was a friend of mine actually who was also a student at Columbia with me. She made a sort of graphic on Instagram, an image, and then breaking down, explaining like why it was problematic. And he actually started to follow her and had a conversation on Instagram between them. And she sent him my video. He never responded, but my video had so many people liking it and tagging him that I'm sure he saw it. He never responded to me. And I tried to approach the situation also not putting him down, but sort of trying to relate to him and speak to him why it was problematic, what he said, why it's something that doesn't represent us, why so many people are angry. And I also give him the opportunity to be able to, try to understand on a deeper level. We all make mistakes. We all have wrong perception. We all say wrong things. Like, it doesn't make you a bad person. But he never reached out to me. I do think he saw it, but I can't fully confirm.
But it's like what you said about Jewish education. Like, I really believe that someone like him is a product of Jewish education. It doesn't teach you to be upstanding and know your history and be proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve. Thank you, everybody. I think it's been fascinating. Rudy, kol hakavod to you for all the work you do advocating for Israel. We all grew up in Zionist homes and we're very proud of you. So thank you for sharing of your time. And really good luck with your project in Africa. I hope it all works. And I would like to remind everybody that tomorrow we have a virtual tour to Haifa in the vision of Theodor Herzl, run by the Heritage Center, the Ben Gurion Heritage Center at 11 o'clock. So if you're able to join us, we look forward to that. Good night to everybody and thank you for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rudy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Rudy.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.